There's nothing so dramatic that it means that I should be able to go and say justifiably, I've taken someone's life from them. Like, I can't fathom the thought process that someone would have to go through to do that, but it's happening.
The colour doesn't really come into it when it comes to serious youth violence. The problem is now it's become normalised. How do I make people care about something that doesn't affect them?
Brother Stephen Lawrence was killed in '93, and then since then, just been on a journey of trying to figure out who I am and what I'm supposed to be doing next.
Nationally at the moment and in the news, you hear about different diversity and inclusion. But the thing that people who don't feel really comfortable talking about is race. We all know, okay, the facts, the data's there, the lived experience is there.
The only way for meaningful change is to do things differently.
Welcome to More Than the Badge, a Kent Police podcast. My name is Chief Superintendent Shaun White and I'll be your host. Today's episode is with Colin Burton and Stuart Lawrence. Welcome to the podcast, Colin and Stuart.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Colin, tell me a little bit about yourself and your background.
So if I start with policing, I wear multiple hats within policing. I have national roles, I have local roles. I'm the chair of the Independent Advisory Group. I also chair the use of force, stop and search disproportionality meetings. I sit on professional standards, custody and detention. I have two national roles, which is the Community Reference Group chair and lead for the Police Race Action Plan. I also I've just formed a new board actually for the Met, which is for the LGBTQ, which we're in the process of launching. And there's another one that I'm working on that launched in December that I can't talk too much about, but it's a public inquiry, a chairing position for that as well. Background is business. Been in recruitment for over 20 years. I think 2008 is when I launched my first organisation, working for myself. And now I just basically use my business transitional skills in policing to make a difference.
Do you think policing could do with some more consultants from your field to make a difference?
1,000,000%. I identify opportunities all the time and people. My whole head is a network. You know, so as you're telling me the problem, I'm thinking of if I can fix it or if I can't fix it, do I know someone who can? And I do. That's just how I work. It's always about just joining those dots. I love that. That's the bit that keeps me alive. And that's why I get to go around and travel to different forces and give keynotes about what I'm doing. And people embrace it because it's different. It's not what you're used to. You know, I'm coming from a different angle. Like, where has this come from? It's interesting. I know it's unique, but it shouldn't be. You know, I don't want to be the one person that's known for that. And that comes down to the representation thing again as well. When I walk into a room, everyone knows who I am. That's fantastic for your ego. But looking around, it's not great. It's not a great place to be. And that's the other thing that I'm always harping on about representation. It's not a one-trick pony thing. But if it was the other way around, if it was the reverse, it would be a problem. And this way around, it isn't. That needs to be addressed.
And Dr. Lawrence, yourself.
Yeah, I keep that doctor one really sort of throws me off every now and again. It does. And when I did get my honorary doctorate from Greenwich University, they did say when you put it on your CV, it doesn't go in the part where it says qualifications, and it has to go to an awards part. So, yeah, full title, the honorary Dr. Stuart Lawrence. Again, family man. You know, I always say to people dad first. That's the most important job that I do. I've got a 14-year-old son who's football crazy, wants to become a professional footballer like most kids do. Husband, brother, cousin, you know, family's really important to me. So that I always start there. And then, brother Stephen Lawrence was killed in '93. And then since then, just been on a journey of trying to figure out who I am and what I'm supposed to be doing next, because going from being a middle child to the eldest child was a bit of a baptism of fire. But yeah, no, I've navigated myself to finish college, finish university. The longest job I've had was probably school teaching. So I did that for 20 years in one place, which I really enjoyed. I think that's probably one of the best experiences I've had. Teaching more about myself than anyone else. I do say that as well. And then since leaving teaching now, so start my own business around consultancy stuff in education, diversity and inclusion and that sort of stuff. And now trying to help Kent with the race action plan stuff, and really interested of how we're going to together just move the conversation forward and hopefully get a lot more community involvement, because again, that's where I see myself as being able to. I like to say that the analogy I like to use is to jam between two bits of bread. That's the way I see myself, to try and put all these two different and massive and complicated organisation and communities together to try and make the environment better for everyone. Again, I've got family that live in Kent as well, so I have an invested interest.
No, nice. So how do you two know each other then? How did you two connect? That's the main thing. It's a weird combination.
We have a mutual friend, shall we say.
We have a mutual friend, and
Yeah.
we both won an award. Which remind me of the title of that award again was the...
It was the Women in Power, isn't it? 100 Women of Power.
It's the Denim Award.
Yeah, and how, again, through allyship, that whole idea of, you know, what can I do? Why am I winning an award to do with women? But is that through the idea of allyship and togetherness and speaking and going to bat for people and organisations and individuals that may not have nothing to do with you personally, or maybe the first thing people think about. But I always say, especially around that space around women, is that I've got a mum, I've got a sister. Yeah. Most of my family are females, so therefore I'm always going to be the first person to say and to try to speak up and be a good ally. And that's just not just by my words, but it's my actions as well that I say.
No, that's pretty good. So you both connected about 6 months ago, was it a year ago?
September. It was the legendary Leader of the Decade award. We both got one each by the University of East London. Mine was in relation to some of the initiatives I'm running at the moment to get young people back into employment. And if it's not employment, into mentoring and safe spaces after school. And Stuart was sat next to me. I've known Stuart for a while, but we don't speak as much as we speak now. It's just grown. Yeah, we're on a number of projects together. Got the same aim. You know, same understanding in relation to what needs to be changed. And it's a lot easier if you're unified as opposed to trying to do it alone.
100%.
You need a team.
Definitely.
Yeah. And Stuart, I know that you're a bit of an author as well, aren't you?
Yes. Again, these are all new worlds that I find myself in, especially being a dyslexic person. I always say to people, I'm a keen reader. I do believe that the ability to be able to find information and work things out for yourself is a brilliant strength and quality to have. And a lot of that can come through reading. And so I've always been an avid reader, but I didn't know I was dyslexic until I was 22. So my dyslexia affects me like a plain piece of paper, a pen, and someone says, right, Stuart, you've got to write something. Fills me with dread. It really does. And but saying that, technology's moved forward such a way now where I can speak into my phone and it can write it for me. I don't have a problem having to communicate in that way. So that's how I write my book. So yes, I've written 2 books so far. Silence is Not an Option, Use Your Voice for Change, which was written for my son as he was transitioning from primary school into secondary school. And then realising as a secondary school teacher, there's lots of things I can teach him and talk to him about that I needed him to know, that maybe it wasn't going to be as prescriptive of, oh, you're going to big school now. Like there's so many different layers to it. There's something called a hidden agenda where kids teach other kids stuff. And that happens a lot more at secondary school than it does at primary school because of the access they have and the amount of time they spend by themselves without adult supervision. So being in that environment, I need my son to be, A, taking on good information and giving out good information, and B, which I realise that some people don't have good, strong role models around them, which is, again, sort of like really weird for someone like myself who's got a really big, extensive family, like I said, older brother, etc., etc. So I always had a support network around me. But the older I get, I now more realise that not everyone has that support network. So how can I put something in place so that these young people can feel like they have someone, even though I'm not going to be there all the time? And that's why the book's a great thing. And then my second book that I wrote was called Growing Up Black in Britain, which again is that experience of being othered. What I've realised now, and the more people that I speak to from different communities, is you come to a point in your life where you realise that whatever you think you are and you are, someone may not see you like that.
Yeah, that's right.
And perceive you like that. And then when you then realise that it may just not be 1 or 2 people, then what do you do? Yeah. Then how do you react? So it was about those individuals, some famous people and their lives, about what it was like to be a kid in the different areas that they were brought up. Because again, London's a very special bubble. It's such a mixing pot. I don't know how many 70 different languages are spoken and how many over 20 different nationalities represented in the capital constantly. So when you're in those environments, difference and someone that doesn't look the same and talks, it's just you just get used to it.
Yeah.
Whereas if you're not from those environments, it can seem a bit weird when someone from a different background or speaks a different language or has a different cultural background or different types of food. All those things can be very different, and in that difference, sometimes fear creeps in, and that's why people react the way that they do. So it's about how can I break those walls down to say we're just human beings, we're just like everyone else, trying to navigate spaces to make it in the world and trying to be good people. 90% of us are trying to do that all the time as well. So that was important.
I think I'm just going to, talk about that book you just said, growing up.
Black and Brown, yeah.
Black and Britain. I think that feeds in nicely to the race action plan. Yeah. A lot of people, viewers and, listeners to this, most people don't even know what the race action plan is.
Yeah.
Because I know when I go out and speak to people, they say to me, what is that? But what you actually do find out, there's pockets of different versions of the race action plan in different organisations across the country. Mm-hmm. I'm not one really for politics. I'm just pretty a basic person at the moment. But, nationally at the moment and in the news, you hear about different diversity and inclusion. But the thing that people who don't feel really comfortable talking about is race. Mm-hmm. And when I think about 4 or 5 years ago about the race action plan, I think about where I was at that time. I was in the Metropolitan Police Service and how it impacted the force there in the communities around us. 4 or 5 years later, I'm now in Kent Police, and what I'm saying is I'm in a completely different environment. Mm. So in a nutshell, the race action plan to me is about policing, trying to make a difference for the black communities, but not only black communities, but it's brown communities. Because if we get this right, we can lead in so many different directions. So policing is basically saying around, we need more black people and brown people in policing. Not just in policing, at the senior levels. 30 years, we've talked about it. But I think we've got that time now where we really can make a difference. But it's not just recruiting them. As you know, Colin does recruitment as well. Colin would say, it's about retaining them.
Yeah, that's the
and making them feel valued in the workplace and that we're really making a difference. We talk about community engagement. Now, policing, if we're completely honest with ourselves, we've got a problem around trust and confidence and legitimacy. We've got loads of scrutiny by the media, but, we know now that we've got to do something about it. We know we have to integrate ourselves in the community. We know we have to sit down and we need to listen to them. It's not just about race. We can talk about misogyny. We can talk about ableism. We can talk about people who are disabled, the LGBTQ community. They all feel disenfranchised with policing. They don't feel they have a voice. But at this moment in time, the race action plan, what I see is a gateway to make the difference. And then when we talk about stop and search and police powers, we all know, the facts, the data's there, the lived experience is there, disproportionality exists, particularly amongst the black community. We can look in the criminal justice system, a black person in Kent who is a victim of crime, 31% more likely a black person is to be a victim of violent crime. Now that is saying something, And how do they actually feel supported around that? When we talk about stop and search, I think in Kent we got it right here. We've got it right around stop and search. Colin, I know you're on the police powers panel and that, and, I'll give you a chance to talk about the work you do around that. But the criminal justice piece around the race action plan is really important.
Yeah.
If we actually look at it, there's more black people in the criminal justice system, in prisons who just go through it, and we need to understand why. Now, I know I'm about to do some work with the CPS to look at disproportionality, but this is a journey that, that we all have to go on to. So, what do you think of the race action plan? Colin, I'll just go to you first.
It's not an issue and it's not a problem, but my biggest thing about PrEP is the lack of awareness and the lack of exposure that it gets and the lack of support that it gets. It's growing now, but that hasn't always been the case. And also that it's that thing about having these conversations, which is why we brought Stuart here in the first place, just to make it, it feels like sometimes when you're in a police environment, it could be almost career threatening to talk about race. And that's not a Kent problem, that's a national problem, because as you know, I travel to all the different forces, etc. So I see it through a different perspective. But I just think there's so much more improvement that can be made. But in terms of PrEP, it's on the right path. It still needs a lot of support to get to where it needs to be, etc. And you've got to remember there's people that have been fighting for this for many years, from all the different McPherson, Scarman, Casey, all the different reports, etc. And it's really hard to convince them that why is it going to be different this time? That's the hardest bit of the journey. But I think through conversations like this, relaxing conversations like this, right, where you're not expected to retain a lot of information and you can just converse, I think that's what's going to make the difference. But it is a long way to go. And I do see changes being made, but there is a lot of bureaucracy around it as well. There is a lot of red tape around it to get this policy implemented, but I'm confident it will be done.
So race action plan for me, I think this is the first time, or one of the times that I can see that it's like there's a problem, here are some of the elements to that solution to that problem, and here's how we're going to go out about trying to do this sort of stuff. That for me is really sort of like, I feel a bit different about the other times. Because it's that, I always say to people, that's that thing about insanity, isn't it? If you're doing the same thing and expecting a different outcome, then how's it going to happen? Mm-hmm. Something's got to change, and this is where the change is now. You know, we've broken it down to 4 pillars. Mm-hmm. You've understood that these 4 pillars can be instrumental in the changing of the conversation and the pushing off in a new direction. And for me, that's what gives me a little bit more hope this time around. You are in the position of power. You've done training, you've gone on this course, you've plotted this pathway. You've now been given by the king, by royal descent, to take away someone's liberty. And for me, there's no bigger sense of responsibility, really, than to be able to do that, to take away someone's right to roam these green grasses that we live in, and to say, no, I can put hands on you, I can stop you from doing that. But then, like I say, with great power comes great responsibility. I do believe that. So, like Colin was saying, it's important to have uncomfortable conversations and to know where things haven't gone right in the past and why these communities feel the way they do. Because it's not a case of them unjustifiably saying these things. The data and the stats back it all up.
Yeah.
So that's the bit, again, that I'm hopeful that, you know, it's not a blame game, but it's about understanding where we are and to understand where we need to go next. That's the bit that's really important.
I think something you raised earlier was around quality policing.
Yeah.
And I think that's what we all aspire to do. Because if you have quality policing, then you get your trust and confidence, and then you start building with your communities there. And I think the message what I try to get across around cops is the most important thing, we back you to do your job 100%.
Yeah.
You should wear your uniform with pride.
Yeah.
But the other thing we want you to do, you know, is understand what that oath actually means, which what you've highlighted.
Yeah.
And deliver first-class policing. Because that's all, you know, some people might say it's easy for me to say that.
Yeah.
You know, but I've got through 30 years of my career, which I would say, you know, been fully pledged to being a really top public servant. You know, public service runs through my DNA, and most importantly, trying to deliver the best policing that I can, which I think is so important. I think perhaps nationally, Colin, which you've raised nationally, you know, but from an outsider, what do you think we could do differently?
For me, it's all about the approach. I just think it needs to be different. It needs to be bespoke. It needs to be tailored towards the people that you're dealing with. You can't have a one size that fits all. And it's about this being innovative, just doing something different. Mm-hmm. When you do something different, people remember, right? If you do the same routine, adapt the same routine that you'd apply to any other thing within policing, then it just feels the same old. And that's, I just think you need to do things differently to get to people's attention and to show that you're making a difference as well. There's things that you can do in terms of some of the things that I'm working on at the moment, which has been ascertained from going around and doing community engagement, is looking at young people and how they feel that lack of value, right? Which is then taps into what we're reading about every day with serious youth violence and things like that. That's where the recruitment bit for me comes in terms of providing opportunities for them. And that's national, because this isn't a London problem. Yeah, this is a problem across the UK, regardless of race. So PrAP, it's got my full support. I mean, one thing people need to understand is PrAP is the original, right? And if we master that I think it will be utilised as a blueprint for other things, for other protected characteristics, for any other things they need to implement. And it's not going to be finished by June or July, etc. It's something that's going to need constant adjustment. So we'll be tweaking it all the time. But it's going in the right direction, but it still needs more support and it needs more awareness. And that awareness comes from more engagement and people just talking about it.
Yeah, absolutely spot on. Listen,
So can I just add there?
Go on, definitely.
I think it's the bespoke part. I think that's the bit that people are finding the most difficult. You know, there's lots of institutions that like things to be packaged and put in bows, and here you go, just do that. And this is not one of them, so that makes people feel a bit nervous and a bit sort of like less apprehensive because they're like, well, so just tell me what you did and what worked for you, and I'll do the same. It's not that. Because every sense of community has a different outlook to what they face. You know, so the Kent black community is different from the London black community. I don't know all the nuances, but like I said, I'm getting to know it because some of my family's now moved down here. So therefore, I'm starting to. I asked my cousin that question. He's in his 50s now. So I asked him about that, about stop and search. No, Stu, I haven't. No, since moving down here, I haven't done. Whereas his experience from living in South East London is completely different. So again, I think we always need to temperature gauge of where the issues and problems are. You know, it may not be stop and search. It may be, you know, the youngsters are hanging around outside a local convenience store that's during the half term that's causing the problem, issues. And, you know, it's a particular group of people from a particular community. Are they bad people? No, this is half term. They're just doing what most young people wanted to do, which is find places and spaces to hang around and be with their mates and not have to conform to the joys of life that you usually have to do when you're at school. So someone else that doesn't usually see them there, that could be an issue and a problem for them. But until we engage in that level of conversation to have a better understanding, then assumptions get thrown around and presumptions get thrown. And that's, for me, is the bit that we're going wrong again. Again, it's about having that line of, you know, why can someone from the community just go, young man, what are you doing here? Oh, we're just hanging around because it's half term. Okay, cool. Then no one needs to call the police rather than twitching through your curtains going, oh, they're wearing hoodies. They're playing loud music. Oh, hold on. And that fear-mongering of they must be doing bad. Like, if you can't have that conversation, then framing it to a police officer or to phone you and say there's a group of causing problems, disturbances, is going to then give the people with the powers a perception of what's going on, not rather than going, there's a group of young people hanging around, don't know what they're doing. I don't think they're up to no good, but they're just hanging around. It's making me feel uncomfortable. Okay, cool. We'll go and investigate and speak to them and find out what they're doing, and hopefully put your fears aside. Say they're just kids hanging around doing nothing at half term time.
I think you're spot on there. And I think it's what I found from, you know, still being a Londoner myself and come to work in Kent is a completely different experience from what I see the policing style, a more measured approach. And listen, people might say it may not have been like that 20 years ago, but in 2025, this is what we're doing. You know, I think, you know, from my own experiences, you know, the Met taught me how to deal with criticality, you know, really well. But, you know, what I always say, Kent teaches you about leadership, about being right, thinking about things, taking your time, and actually sitting down with people and asking what their views are. Giving everybody a point of view, whether you like it or not, and you just listen to them and you disagree.
Yeah, 100%. That's natural to disagree with someone. I think that, for me, is important. You're not going to agree. Not everyone's point of view is going to be your point of view. Does it make them bad people? Does it make them the enemy? No, like it's just that one point or this topic or this matter that you're just going, I think that, you think this. Cool. But that's part of life as well. We have to be constructively be able to disagree with someone, and that disagreement doesn't lead into violence.
Yeah, I think.
Because again, I think that sometimes, going back to Colin's point about young people, I think that's, for me, the massive point for young people at the moment. They don't know how to conflict resolute. They don't know how to have a disagreement with someone and be able to walk away and feel like their ego or their pride's not been hurt in front of everyone else. So therefore, what does that look like?
No, I think you're spot on. You know, when you talk about, you know, knife crime, you know, brings tears to my eyes whenever I see a a victim of it, regardless of what their colour is. I just think of, I just don't want to see it.
Yeah.
And
Lost opportunity, isn't it?
And it's hurtful.
On both sides, and I think that's the latest one in Woolwich really sort of brought that home for me. That was the couple of days, 3 days before my son turned 14 himself. It was in Woolwich, a place that I grew up and have great affinity for and great love for, and it was on a bus during the middle of the day. It just doesn't make no sense. But again, if we don't enable our young people to have a better sense of community, going back to this whole idea about what is community, what is that about? If people don't have any assumptions or connections or idea of what that means to them, then we are going to continue to have the problems that we have, where people are just going to run around doing things and not understand the consequences. Because again, we've lost two sets of parents there, or how many different sets of parents are losing someone through an incident that could have been avoidable, in my opinion. There's nothing so dramatic that it means that I should be able to go and say justifiably, I've taken someone's life from them. Like I can't fathom the thought process that someone would have to go through to do that, but it's happening. So we as adults, we need to find better solutions for our young people.
Do you know what I'm thinking? Yeah. I'm just thinking, colour doesn't really come into it when it comes to serious youth violence. Age isn't. It is a factor, but it's not a massive factor. Your location is not a massive factor, right? The problem is now it's become normalised, right? Yeah. So people are desensitised to it. You read about it, and it's just another one, right? And this is something that's reoccurring with everything that I do in policing. I was working it out the other day. I've got 14 different hats within policing, but I've got the same theme for every single role that I deliver. And that is, how do I make people care about something that doesn't affect them?
Yeah.
It's the biggest problem that I've got. And until someone's personally affected by something that's happening, they'll never understand the gravity of the situation. Because to them, it's just a headline. And it depends what you read as well. If you read one of the normal papers, etc., that doesn't describe things and gives you the accurate detail or portrays a narrative that's negative, then that's even worse, because then it is just another one. You just turn the page. And that's another thing that needs to be addressed.
Are you able to tell us a little bit about the work you're doing around young people and trying to divert them from crime? I mean,
yeah. So it's been a big project that I've been working on since April. I think I'm up to 60, just under 60 multi-agency partners now that want to be a part of it. It's a national initiative, and it's about giving disadvantaged young children or young people value. So giving them an occupation, can provide mentoring. It could be entrepreneurial skills, because some of these young people are just talented, but they're just using it in the wrong direction, right? So it's about prevent. There's safe spaces for young people as well that are still of school age. So when they leave school, because we know all the youth clubs are gone, reintroducing that as well. But it's what's interesting is the momentum it's gained in the last sort of 2 to 3 months. Like, everybody now wants to be a part of it, whereas before it was all a case of funding, happy to put a brand next to it but don't have any money, etc. Now it's not a question of finances anymore. It's more about how can I help, to the point where it's actually quite overwhelming. So it's a really exciting space to be in. Nobody's ever done anything like this before, apart from you. And it's great to tap into your network as well, and your wisdom around it, because you delivered it between a certain period. And I remember you quoting stats of a 35% reduction in serious youth violence within 6 months. Wow. That's just in London, and we're looking at doing it nationally. And I won't go into the different parameters of what agencies are involved, but it is the majority. And those that are missing will join at any time soon. That's just, it'll be a joint effort. But I'm excited by it. Stuart's on the journey with me now. You're on the journey. Everyone's on the journey. Yeah. And it will make a difference. That's the most important thing. It will make a difference. And I'm not one of these people that you'll see this massive social media launch and stuff. People have seen that. I'm more about delivery. So you won't see me posting anything like that or anything. When the young people start posting that they're happy to have started a role and it was thanks to this, that's when I'm happiest. It's not just about, the glamour show and the fan show. I actually want to see results from it, which is why I'm a little bit evasive, because it's all about the delivery as opposed to the fanfare at the beginning.
Yeah, I think you're spot on there. It's the same with our Kent Police Race Action Plan. We're more about delivery, and I think, I've got Colin on the journey, I've got you now, Stuart, and it's about what positive outcomes we can really make. We don't want the glitzy magazines or the social media hype. We just want people to judge us for our results, legacy and sustainability.
Yeah, 100%. Because again, that for me is the most important. What we doing this for, to leave behind. That's why I'm involved, because like I said, I've got a 14-year-old. He should be able to navigate this great country whenever he wants to. And if he sees a person in uniform, he should go, all right, cool. So I feel a bit more safer now. Not going, oh my goodness, like what they're going to do, what they're going to like. No, it shouldn't be a negative thing. And I just spoke to a young man who's just started the service, and he said to me, "Oh, sometimes I'm not able to say to people what I do." And I said to him, "You do realise you're the insurance policy that we all want to have, to know that's there, but never want to have to use." Because I keep on explaining to people, I'm not capable to pick up a phone and, I'm in trouble, and all of a sudden SWAT team, helicopters, people come around dressed in black, turn up and solve the problem for me. No, I'm like every other member of the community, that if there's a problem, issue, and my house is on fire, I phone the fire service. If I'm not feeling well, I go to the NHS, I go to the hospital. And the same thing, if someone's done something to me, broke into my house, done something criminal to me, then I'm phoning the police. Like, I want to know and understand I have that insurance policy. And I'm a good member of society that, those people that when they do turn up, are going to give me the best service that they can. No matter what I look like, no matter how old I am, they just give me the best service they can. And that, for me, is the most important thing of all of this. So yeah, that's really important for everyone to know. Like, we're all here thinking about what's going to happen once this is all done. It's not about the here and now. It's like you say, about 5-10 years time, look back and go, I was part of that. That's amazing. That, for me, is the biggest accolades for all of this, to say that how we've moved and pushed the dial in a different direction.
Yeah,
that's the super important thing for me here.
Yeah, and I think I think, Colin, you've been around policing for a few years. I know you have as well. And I'd always say to any young person, this is a good profession to get into. Colin, you mentioned, I know we spoke earlier on today, like 143 different career paths you could follow in policing. And a lot of people don't realise that.
Yeah.
I think about 10 or 20 years ago, there would have been a lot of negativity around it. But it goes on to our younger workforce now. When you actually see them, you can go behind a closed door and you don't know who you're talking to, because they all come from varied background, but they all speak the same language. Yeah. And I pick that up all the time. And I think, when I think about hope and the future, I really do see the younger workforce really making a difference, because I really think they can do. I mean, I'm going to ask you both, honestly, what do you think of the younger workforce, whether it's in policing or another public service? Do you really think they could make a change and a difference?
Yeah, I think they can. I think it's their level of, if you speak to most younger people about, for instance, a race action plan, they go, why do we need a plan? Like, why do we need a plan for? Like, it's like 2025 now. Surely everyone's just accepting people as people, like, in this day and age. There's a lot of that sort of like, not misunderstanding, disbelief of, why would you need to write that stuff down? It's just like, that for me is the most powerful part of it all. And again, respectfully, their challenge, I think, respectfully, I think that's the next part where is also going. But I'm a little bit fearful when I hear that, things like professional curiosity or professional challenge. I just get a little bit concerned that we do realise still that this is a hierarchical procedure sort of thing, and that you guys still have policies and procedures that say, when this happens, here are my steps, then what happens next. And if you're asking people then to use their judgment, then what happens with that? That's the little bit in the back of my mind as a lay person that I always go, but how's that going to happen? How's that going to work out? But that's where, again, as the organisation, you're going to have to feel your way through that and work out when people do come up and want to say, this person who's 2 or 3 ranks higher than me said or done this, how are you going to treat that person? Like, and that's getting a little bit of the little bit maybe optimism inside my head, where things of the past have happened, and I've known, again, maybe that's what's talking there. But I'm hopeful that because of the generation of young people that we do have, they won't worry about the same way and have those same fears that I do, because of where they're at and their understanding with things. I think that's the difference this time round.
And Colin?
For me, do you know what? it's refreshing, the young people being in policing, to be fair. What I take from it, I'll tell you what I love the most when you're traveling around, etc., and you get a different perspective of different areas, right? Because you can get on a train and travel for 3 hours and you'll find that it's the same problem, but the person just looks different, right? These problems are universal. But speaking to young people, it's almost the same language that's universally spoken. That's what I quite like. I spend a lot of time traveling, going to different forces, and every time I go, I'm always one of two, maybe one of three that's in the room. And that just needs to change, because that's slightly awkward. You know, sometimes I get used to it, thick-skinned and everything else, but sometimes you look around and just think this landscape is just a bit, it's not reflecting the people that we're looking after. And I don't see a pipeline of people stepping up into that either. I don't see a pipeline of senior black or brown officers coming along, apart from yourself, and a few others that, you know, around the UK, etc. That's lacking. Needs to be addressed urgently. But it's not reward just based on who you are, what you look like. It's got to be down to potential and obviously skill and, you know, experience. But at the same time, there needs to be a concentrated effort. But as you just mentioned, people don't know in terms of, I think it was 145 roles for Kent. So every occupation that you could dream of is available within police, and you just don't know about it. When you talk about police, and they just think someone on the beat.
Yeah.
There's so much more to it than that. But it's that lack of exposure, that lack of education. It's like anything. Till you start talking to people and engaging with them and telling them what's going on, that's when you get the interest. But that's why I keep saying it's about innovation and having a bespoke approach, right? You can't keep doing stuff that you were doing in 1990 and hoping that you're going to get the same result. Those days are gone. It doesn't work like that anymore. So it needs to be changed.
I think what I've tried to do as being the lead for the race action plan in Kent is try and work with different people I normally wouldn't speak to or engage with. So we've gone out there to the universities and sat down and had some meaningful conversations with them. And they think differently completely to us. And they tell us that, you know, straight away, you know, when their student body comes in, their student population, they're not even looking at race or any other protected characteristic. They're just looking at the majority who just come through the door, want to get an education, really want to do a good job. And you find the majority of the lecturers feel that same way as well. But how can you pick that up and put that in a public institution? Not just policing. You've got the fire service, you've got the ambulance service, you've got the military. How can we actually do that? Because then you get the best talent that automatically rises to the top. And we both agree it's not about the colour of your skin, it's about quality, isn't it?
Yeah,
that's what we want to see at the top. And as you actually think about it, the majority of black people now, when you speak to them, you know, a lot of them haven't got an issue with the police. What they've got an issue with is the quality of policing that they actually receive. And that's what they expect, a first-class service. And I think that's so important. And you raised that earlier.
Yeah, and that's why I like the analogy, and this is not my analogy, I have to confess. This is from Clive, he said. And he said, whenever you're speaking to, and I didn't say it today, so I'm glad I've got a chance to say it now, which is, whenever, he says to all new recruits, whenever you're dealing with a member of the public, in the back of your mind, if you just go, that could be a member of my family, that will change your whole perspective on the way that you police. Just go, once if that was one of my family, once if that was my brother, my sister, or my cousin, how would I want that person to receive the service? How would I want them to be spoken to? What would my aspects be? And when you introduce that into your savviness of life, you approach it completely different, because who's going to want someone to be rude to a member of, or speak down to them, or belittle them, and all these other things that certain members of the community say, that's the way that they feel when dealing with the police. So I think that for me is the most important phrase, terminology, ideal that I can ask everyone just to try to adapt and to think about, because that's probably the easiest and simplest way to look at it. What happens if that was a member of my family? What would I want that outcome, procedure, spoken to be like? And that will give everyone that sense of fairly, hopefully, with a bit of common courtesy, with a little bit of respect, even if they've done the most ridiculous thing, the most gruesome thing. Speaking to someone with respect is supposed to be the most common thing that we can all expect of each other as human beings. And for me, that's what's important, really is.
Yeah. Colin, anything you want to add to that?
Do you know what? Just thinking from what Stuart said, that approach in terms of thinking or you know, identifying someone as a family member to make sure that, you know, you treat them fairly. it also makes you more natural when you engage with people, right? Because we know in terms of policing with hierarchy and stuff, and it's quite scripted in terms of everything that you need to get over in a conversation point when you're addressing someone. But if you're speaking to them in that manner, you're quite natural with it, all right? And you're less likely to make mistakes, because that is the thing. When you're scripted, you overthink. And if that person is, quite quickly in terms of their remarks and stuff, it can throw you off, etc. And then before you know it's a problem again, it just gets worse. So there's a natural style that comes by viewing people like that as well. And I think that's quite a successful aid, I think, in terms of delivering a service.
So I'm going to ask you a question now, right? What changes would you like to see in policing? And what can we do, the police service, do to enable you to help us to do this?
I think we should ask you that first. I'm keen, because 30 years service, there's nothing you haven't seen.
Yeah.
Right? Stuart's been around longer than I have. I've got multiple hats within policing, but it's still over a 3.5 year period. I'd like to know what you would like to see changed. What would make you retire at some point thinking,
I've done my bit.
Amazing.
Yeah.
Well, that's an interesting question. What I would say is, I come from a generation in policing that, when I joined in 1995, it was completely different. There wasn't nobody hardly that looked like me at all. But I think, and there was that canteen culture where there were behaviours there which are just generally not appropriate. But, I think I just wanted to fit in. I wouldn't say that I completely fitted in, because I was always, someone would say, I stood up for myself and, I just did what was the right thing, basically. I think that what I always say, the temperature check to me is when I can be out with my family, and then you can think to yourself, you see someone that you've arrested or you may have dealt with, and they come up to you and shake your hand and say, look, I know that day I did something wrong, but you treated me fairly and respectfully. And I would say, that's the measure of me. I'm fair, but I'm firm. Okay. And I think the changes what I would like to see in policing is I'd feel more comfortable to say that, there's more people that look like me in senior positions in policing. I think, when we talk about females in policing, 43% of chief constables in the UK are female, and we've got there. We've worked really so hard to be there. But in the UK, we've never had a female of colour, black or brown, chief constable, and I would really like to see that. I'd be really comfortable around that. And I think more thinking about showing more empathy in policing. Yeah, I think that's so important. A big push on prevention, and I think we're going towards that direction anyway. Yeah, why are people behaving like this? Yeah, why are people doing that? And some people might say to yourself, well, we're not social services or anything like that. But the thing is, the amount of money that we push in enforcement after we've actually done something could actually be pushed in prevention. How much does it actually cost to investigate a murder now? There's no price on anybody's life. It's £1 million potentially. But if we push that money towards preventing those happening in the first place, it could really make a difference. And I think partnership working, collaborating with the blue light services, I think is really important. But what I would like to see is, getting back to public service, people knowing the police when they join, it's all about public service and it runs through them. And I think that's so important. I think in Kent, they've got a really good chief constable, and I've got 30 years in policing, and I can say he's a copper. He's someone who's come from joining as a constable, no fast track, no microwaving through or anything like that. He's gone through the ranks really long and hard, and done some year in all the ranks. And I have to honestly say, he's proper, and he gets difference. He knows how to lead difference and manage difference. And I feel that if anyone's going to lead change in policing, from what I can see from 30 years, is possibly going to maybe come from him, and he may not even know I would say that. But what I've seen, I really do think he could make a difference in policing. So going back to the changes, what I would like to see is representation, more focus on prevention, which we're heading in that direction as well, and teaching police officers more around empathy in their training and conflict resolution. So those are the things that I'd pick out.
I definitely would say, for me, it's weird that you talk about empathy, because I don't. If you said that to, I think if you said that to most police officers, they would get that mixed up with sympathy. I've just finished doing my first level 2 counselling course. So I'm going to be doing another one in my level 3, and that for me was the biggest eye-opening moment, to understand that lots of people misunderstand sympathy and empathy. And the easiest way for me to break it down for people to have a better understanding to say this: sympathy is, oh my goodness, Shaun, you're in a hole. Man, that must be really bad to be in that hole. Let me get in the hole and come and join you. Oh, you must be so sad being down here. Whereas empathy is, you're in a hole. What can I do to help you get out of that hole? How you got here? Me asking questions and having an understanding of how you've got to that position. Not wanting to try and help, not wanting to try and change it, but just to have an understanding of how you got there. And in that understanding of how you got there, you've probably got the best solutions to get yourself out of it. And for me to try and facilitate you trying to get out yourself out of the hole, rather than trying to do it for you. That for me is the biggest thing. And the more that we can get people to understand that, the more that you can push that agenda forward, because I think there's still a little few people that think sympathy and empathy are the same thing. So that's something that I definitely would like to be clarified, so that when people are implementing empathy, oh my goodness, you've done a stupid thing. How did you get to that? How did you find yourself in that situation to do that stupid thing where now I've been called? Which goes back to your prevent part. But then again, that's why I always say to people, maybe what we need to do is we need to separate this out. Maybe we do need a bit more social worker, a bit more community minded, a bit more understanding role versus the enforcement part where I need someone to come and kick down a door and take away the bad guys. Like them two things are so totally different. And I think asking someone to do both is where the confusion comes in sometimes. Because there are some people who are better suited just to do the kicking down the doors, locking around bad people, whereas there's other people who are better at, oh my goodness, how have you got here? Empathetic, understanding, wrap around, more culture. And I think that for me is asking for one person to do both roles really well is for me when the confusion comes in. So that's something I definitely would love to have a conversation about and see how we can strip that out a bit more and make it a force and a service on two different prongs there.
I think the key thing, what I would always say from this is, if you're a bad person, you come to Kent, okay, we're going to catch you and we're going to lock you up. The simple reason is we're going to keep your family safe. Okay, most important thing. So I think I love the side of the soft skills and what I think they're so important. But the thing is, regardless of the colour of your skin, you're a bad man and you come to Kent, we're going to chase you all around the country and we're going to lock you up, because our most important are the residents. Regardless of your colour of your skin, we're here to keep your family safe, so you'll be able to go out and walk comfortably and feel safe around that. And I know, Colin, we've had many chats around this, but your views for the future?
They're quite similar to yours, to be fair, about the representation bit. That's what I'd like to see. No matter where I'm travelling in the country, I'd like to see more representation. I'd like to see less risk aversion, is what I'd like to see. And that comes with being innovative and welcoming change. But it just feels very safe at the moment. This is what we've always done. Can't keep doing that. It doesn't work. At what point are you going to realise this doesn't work anymore and I need to change? It's 2025. I'd like to see more accountability. So you stop passing stuff on. If you've got the rank and the authority to decide on something, decide on it.
Yeah, spot on.
Yeah, if you've got expert advice coming externally, utilise it. I think the trajectory that I've had within policing, it's only 3.5 years, but it is literally vertical in terms of how it's worked. And a lot of that is because I use business transitional skills within policing, which no one else is really doing, right? And I speak in layman's terms. It's all common sense. The stuff that I'm suggesting is quite straightforward and easy to implement. But there's always something behind it why they can't. And that needs to change. I know bureaucracy will always be there, but there needs to be some kind of level of leniency or something where you can just make a decision, etc., and not worry about repercussions. And I know policing, and I know the authority you've got, and I know it's a hectic situation to be in, and lots of responsibility, etc. But at the same time, the old way is not working, right? So I want to look at recruitment and retention. There's so many things you can do in terms of recruitment, in terms of I think that you should do some sort of what can I call it? In terms of planning out people's careers when they join policing, right? So instead of just saying this is what you're going to do when you join and maybe in 2 to 5 years you can achieve X, what is it you actually want to achieve within policing, right? So that you can provide some kind of guide for them. And you don't guarantee those slots because it all does depend on performance and reliability and everything else. But at the same time, if there's a structured career path, you probably have less of a battle with retention. It's because you're not keeping people's interests, or they're not seeing the progression come in, or maybe the money's not right. There's so many different factors that can be considered. But I think with policing, when it comes to retention, it's always just, they left because of the money. Yeah, so it's hard not to be just a number. And this isn't a Kent thing. This is a national thing. I could give you a list of the things that I'd like to see implemented, but then the consultancy bit means you'd need to engage me first.
And the thing is not to forget that Kent has had the only black chief constable, and that's forgotten because a lot of the young people now don't even know that we had Michael Fuller, who was a chief constable. Yeah, and when you speak to young people here, who's he? Yeah, they're forgotten about him, and nationally, he's forgotten. Yeah, but he was a trailblazer. Yeah. When you actually think what he created in the Met. Yeah. He created, Operation Eagle Eye, Operation Bumblebee. He formed Trident, and then he came to Kent and he became the chief constable. And he's just gone out the door and everybody's forgotten about that. Yeah. But in this force now, we're trying to recognise the good work that he's done. Yeah. We don't want to forget about it. I'm interested in the qualities that the man had and what he delivered in some serious pressured times.
Yeah, 100%.
So it's that's what we need to focus on.
Yeah, definitely.
The good stuff that he done. And I think that's important.
I don't think we forget.
No, we don't forget.
Do you know what I mean? Because for us, it's the only aspiration that we've got. So we don't forget, but at the same time, we need to make sure that he's not forgotten and make sure that he doesn't feel like he's forgotten.
Yeah. And make sure he's not the only one either.
Exactly.
Yeah. That's the most important part, isn't it? So I think lessons to be learnt from there, what enabled him to get to that position, rank and file, when he's there, what pressures did he face? Because again, when you're the only one doing something, that's a lonely place to be.
It's tough.
And to be at the very top of an organisation is even more of a lonely place. So what was being done to support him? They're the questions that float through my mind afterwards. How do we take his pathway and what lessons do we learn so that we can not replicate it exactly, but again, lessons learned, chosen path, most trodden, the easiest path. Like that's also the succession of how he got there is also must be really important to document so that others can look at it and go, well, it was possible. He did do it. He did do it. So
one thing to highlight just quickly is that, because we speak a lot about policing, obviously because of the environment we're in, but this is a problem in the Home Office as well. There's not enough representation. The fire service is not enough representation. It covers quite a few different areas of industry, and all of that needs to be tackled, which is why I like elements of the PrEP where we're actually doing partnerships now, because that's when you'll start to see the change, because doing stuff on your own just doesn't work. We've seen that. Yeah, it's time to partner up.
No, you're right. Collective approach. And I know, Colin, you've mentioned that before. It can't be done in isolation. It's, how to say, all systems approach towards it.
Yeah.
But you know what, guys? I have to say, thank you very much.
No, thank you.
Yeah, thanks for having us.
It's been absolutely brilliant. But anything final you want to say?
No, I think that would be my lasting factor, which is about that, from Clive Driscoll, about that point about family members. That'd be my last. If anyone's watching this or listening to this, if that's the one thing you take away, then I know for a fact that's going to make a difference in your policing and the way that you police. So that will be it for me, please. Like I said, just doesn't matter what the person's done, as stupid or horrific as you may think it may seem to yourself, at the end of the day, that person has had another two people in their lives that's brought them here in the first place. That person will also have maybe another bit of extended family somewhere as well. So they are still a human being. And we should just find some common courtesy to be able to respect them as a common human being and treat them that way. And that's why I say, if you can just look at them like, that could be a member of my family. That could someone in my family could have done something silly like that, and they could find themselves there as well. So how would I like them to be treated and to be looked at from that point of view would really be helpful for me.
Carl?
Embrace change, be more innovative, listen more, and try things. It's not a problem to fail. It can be within police, and I understand that there can be repercussions, but in terms of process, it's not a problem to fail because you learn and you start again. But we're not learning. We're using the same things that we've done for 200 years. It's time. It's time for change.
Yeah. Well, representation, I think it's been talked about for 30 years and beyond that. I can even think about as a child going on the underground and looking at a poster of a black guy running, and the caption says, "Who is he?"
Yeah,
you can remember that one.
No, it's an Ian McConnell. I speak about it all the time. I do, and it's that whole thing about perception, isn't it? And about that thing about unconscious bias, and what that picture is. To paint the picture is there's a white copper with a bobby hat on that's chasing, and there's a black guy, plain clothes, and they're running, and it looks like the bobby's chasing the black guy. And basically, this was from the 1980s. This was an advert trying to get better representation in the Met Police Force at the time. That's what it was about.
Yeah.
And when you turn the page over, or the next time you see the next picture, you get a wider shot, and they're both basically police officers chasing. I think the guy had like big spiky hair or punk rocker look. I can't remember what it was. And I always say to people, that's because, and I ask people, I show the first picture, I go, what's going on here? And people say, oh, there's a guy chasing a black guy, it's a copper chasing a criminal, and all these sort of different. And I go, well, that's the perspective that you was looking at. You weren't looking at the bigger perspective, and this is the biggest perspective, which is what we're talking about here. And for me, the reason why we need more representation is because it's a bit like the introduction of the women into police force. For centuries beforehand, only men were police officers. And all of a sudden, someone's like, well, what happens if we introduce women? What will happen? Oh, no, they won't be able to do this. They won't be as big and strong. And all these other problems and issues, the reasons why they shouldn't. Anyway, we've got past that. They're now part of the force. Has it made a richer part of the service? Of course it has. Because in rooms now, there's a different point of view being spoke about.
Yeah, spot on.
And that's the same what you're talking about here about better representation, Cole. It just allows someone from a different background, from a different perspective to say, oh yeah, but hold on a minute, guys. Have you thought of it like this? Because the way I'm looking at it, the way I see it is da-da-da-da-da-da. And just puts a different voice in the room. And I don't need to bang on about the percentage of the benefits that having better representation in institutions, forces and different organisations, because they speak for themselves. You get a bit better, richer service inside, the way that people are being treated, and then outside, the way that people are receiving it as well. Because if you can see something, you go, oh, I relate to that. Automatically, it puts your shoulders down. It makes you feel a bit more comfortable. That's what it's there for as well. So I'm a firm believer to say to people, look, going back to what we've been saying about the whole of this task, which is if you're doing the same things expecting different outcomes, that's insanity. The only way for meaningful change is to do things differently. So therefore, if your service is only full of men, introducing women into your service is going to make you think doing things differently. If your representation in Kent is 5%, but you don't have 5% representation of difference, i.e. colour, then they're not going to feel like they're being represented at all to when you're trying to do things to them. But if they can see representations themselves, they're like, oh, whoa, hold on. So that person from my community wouldn't be trying to do this to me if they didn't think this would be right. They'd stand up for myself and say something and do something differently. So I think there's that part as well, just to give that sense to the community, the outside organisation, that you're mindful and you understand about difference. I think that's what that representation does as well. So that when things are happening to that side of the community, you can't just say, oh, yeah, but it's just the way that all these things always been done. You know, black people have always been stopped and searched more than other people and treated differently. If there's better representation in force, then hopefully those things won't happen, because it'd be like, well, hold on, no. You do realise that people from the West Indian or the African culture walk around mostly with woolly with coats on, hoods up, because it's cold in this country. And most of us come from a country where it's a lot warmer, so therefore you're just trying to stay warm most of the time. It's not a case of trying to hide your identity or try to do nothing wrong. That's probably the reason why. And it's like those little things, just having that understanding for me, it just makes things a little bit better.
And Carl?
Do you know what I look at is in terms of ambition and inspiration for young people, right? So you might have a reluctance of young people wanting to join the police, and maybe young black people wanting to join the police, but that's because they don't see anyone that looks like you.
Yeah.
So you can't imagine it because you don't see it. So you see adverts on the side of a bus and on the tube and all the rest of it, but everyone knows that's not real. You know, and someone like you, Shaun, isn't going to be walking the beat or driving a police car that's marked, right? So they don't see it. So that's important. I think to aspire, you need to be able to see it. You need to be able to visualize it, etc. And then if I look at the perspective of maybe one sole black officer working in a force of maybe 3,000-4,000 people, that can be soul destroying.
Yeah,
because no one else understands their viewpoint. No one else understands where they're coming from. And that's this. You're your own worst enemy in terms of your mind, right? You can destroy yourself based on that, even if no one else is actually bothering you. Just that alone can be soul destroying. So that's important. And then I also think you'd have less scripted conversations if you had black officers pairing up with other officers, white officers, Asian officers, etc. when you're out on the beat, right? So knowing how to talk to people, because you learn when you see people, don't you? If you and I are out together and I see how you converse with someone, I'm going to learn and take notes away from that. Rather than you sitting in a classroom or doing a culture board, you know, like that's, I understand the need for it, but at the same time, there's no better introduction than actually working alongside somebody that is of a different background to yourself, because that's how you learn to engage. And half of the problems we've got is because people don't know how to engage, right? So they're scripted. When they're scripted, they're robotic. When they're robotic, it's not genuine, it's not natural, it's not authentic. So what else are you hiding? And it just escalates. So a lot of these problems would go away if you had representation.
I hope so. I really do. Because, you know, policing's been around for, you know, nearly 200 years.
It's not going nowhere, is it?
And still we've only had one black chief constable.
Yeah.
And I would say, you know, I can tell you on one hand how many black detective chief superintendents there are nationally. There's five. There's five of us, and I know them all personally.
Yeah.
You know, and then if you go down to superintendents, most we could name them, you know. But I would say there has to be a change in this area. And I think there's one thing what we need to look at is leading difference and managing difference. Because you've got to be able to, if you're a line manager or even, you know, a senior officer, to be able to manage difference and lead difference, understand the nuances of different people who you're managing and who you're leading. Know that someone may act in a certain way, but you've got to understand why they act in a certain way and feel comfortable with talking about race.
That's what we've been saying, though, isn't it? Comfortableness and comfortableness as well.
So the story I want to share, because I'm always good at sharing stories, is I remember when I was a PC and there was my sergeant, who was a female, and then there was the inspector. And I always remember him coming down and saying, you know, Shaun's, you know, paperwork, you know, isn't up to the standard I want it to be, and blah, blah, blah. And she said, well, have you seen the amount of work he's done? Someone who's arrested that amount of people, they're bound to make mistakes, you know. But she knew where I was coming from.
Yeah.
She sat down and she was able to listen to me and said, Shaun, this is what you need to work on, this is what you need to do. Yeah. But she was supportive and understood the nuances of it. You know, it's like the instances where I've gone into a room and I realised that I'm the only black person in there and how I have to navigate that. And sometimes that can be quite challenging, but it's important for people to understand that. And it's the same for like a female when they go into a room, how they have to navigate that. But the story, I would say, there was a conference and my line manager, I was a DCI, and my line manager said to me, he called me up and said, you need to come in the room. And I said, no, I'm busy. He said, no, you don't see what I'm trying to tell you. You need to come in the room. So I walked down there and I sat at the back. And he said to me, come and sit at the front. And he then said to me privately at the end, you need to let people see you. Yeah? You're the only black guy in the room. You need to sit in the front and let people know who all about you. Yeah? Because you're good at what you're doing. And we need to let people recognise, you know. But there's a lot of conversations, you know, where if it's a female or a male who feel exactly the same, you know, it's an imposter syndrome.
Yeah.
Or when we walk into those spaces, you just feel naturally uncomfortable because it's within your mindset from when you were a younger person, the way how you behave in there. And I think the also thing is if you walk in a room and you've got a little bit of confidence, you know, that's your natural nuances. That's how you know, a person of colour will maybe walk into the room, or the way how they sound or the way they speak, for not someone to be automatically be thinking to themselves, is this person being defensive? Or, you know, the old thing, they may have a chip on their shoulder.
Yeah.
You know, people got to realise that's the way how the person is. But, you know, going back to I see how things can change is, you know, we can't go back and say 10 or 15 years down the line, we're going to make a difference. I think it's a really hard stop and really thinking about, and some people won't like this term, but positive action. I think to just really balance everything up. They did it in Northern Ireland between Catholics and Protestants. And I think positive action in the right way, looking at real quality individuals, I can name them, and just say, right, what we're going to do 5 years, you know, if you're an inspector, you're going to be a superintendent. And you just level the playing field, a one in a lifetime opportunity, and you just level it up. And then you have it, because, you know, there's so many different networks and groups in policing. I think it needs to just be pause, positive action. I know, you know, the HMIC inspector said it, you know, he's all for it. And I think we need to just do that, to just level the playing field. And then behind that, think 5-year plan, how to get that real representation through the force. You know, not lowering our standards, but just really doing it positively and really making a difference.
Yeah.
If you enjoyed this episode, don't forget to follow us on Instagram, X, Facebook and LinkedIn, where we'll be posting the previews of our upcoming episodes. You can watch this episode on our YouTube channel and find out more about the variety of opportunities available by searching Kent Police Careers.